Hi, this is Edward Troxel. In today's tutorial, we're going to look at a script that will let you enter a height and a width, and then it will change all of the generated media to that height and width. Optionally, we'll be able to change the project as well. Now, there is a script built into Vegas that will change all generated media to the height and width of the project. But in this case, he wanted to change the height and width of the generated media to actually a higher resolution than the project. That way, when you zoomed in on it, it would not, like a text event, it would not become grainy as you zoomed in on it. And so, first of all, this is a script with a form, and so it's a little bit different. I do have the form stuff copied over into the main file so that we can easily display the entire thing at once, but also it has all the extra form code in there, and so we'll look at the form first, and then we'll go through and see how the stuff behind the form works, and then we'll see how it actually goes through and changes the generated media or the project settings. And a lot of this is hard-coded, and it may not be the necessarily best way to do some of these things, but it is functional. So if you wanted to do some things in a better format, for example, entering text in the text box, if you wanted to restrict it to only numbers, for example, I'm not restricting it to numbers, but I am making sure that what is entered is a number when I go to get the value of it. So we'll see how all that works, and once again, there could be some better ways, but this is a way. So let's take a look at the form, and then we'll look at some of the code behind the form, and then ultimately we'll get to the point where we make the form work. So let's take a look. Right now, this is the form I have designed. You notice the title says Adjust Generated Media or Project Resolution. Then we have a label here that says Standard Resolutions, and then this is a box called CMB Defaults. So these are our default resolutions. This is the main part that is hard-coded at the moment. We may look at making this more flexible and that these could be no longer hard-coded. And then we have our width and our height. And these numbers will be pulled from the standard resolutions, or you can type in your own values here. And then we have a couple of buttons over here. This button, which I called Button Maintain Aspect, first of all, it will change color when turned on, and so it'll be blue when it's turned on, and it'll be the standard color when it's turned off. But when this is turned on, when you change the width or the height, the opposite one will change automatically to match. So we're getting the aspect between the two, and then when you change, for example, the width, the height will change to match that same aspect. And then here we have another button, which I called BTN Swap, and this will let you swap the width and height so that if you were going from a widescreen to vertical, going from horizontal to vertical, that will let you easily just swap the settings. And then we have a couple of check boxes over here. The first check box lets us adjust all the generated media, and then the second box tells us to adjust the project. So by default, both of these are unchecked at the beginning, and so you would then just check which one or both that you wanted to adjust. And then we have our two buttons down here. This one will actually adjust the settings based on the two check boxes, and this one will just exit without doing anything. So now let's look at a lot of the code behind some of this stuff. We're not going to look at it all in this first tutorial, but we'll go over a couple of tutorials to get all this done. So this is our form1.cs. We're using a form this time. And so I created a couple of global variables. One of them is the maintain aspect, which will be true or false. If it's set to true, then when you change one of the boxes, the other box will automatically change. And then I have this aspect ratio, which will tell us how these height and width compare to each other. Then in our Form 1, this is our initialization part. We get our MyVegas variable, the same as we do in all of our other variables that don't have forms. Then the initialize component is called to draw the actual form. Now all that code is way down here. If we look here, this is the Windows form generated code. If we open that up, then we'll have our initialize component right here. And it creates all of the buttons, all of the labels, all the check boxes, and then it defines what each one of these buttons settings are. And so all of this is just created by the designer. And then all of the controls are added to the form. And then here's the details for the form itself. And then here's the global definition of all of these pieces. So now let's go back up here to the top. The first thing I did is create me a variable called p height. That's the project height, and I'm getting that from myvegas.project.video.height. And then the p width, which is myvegas.project.video.width. And then I'm wanting to set some defaults into that combo box. So the first thing I'm adding is a custom line. By custom, that means whatever they entered does not match, or they have typed into the box. Even if they type something that does match in the box, it does not pick one of these presets to show. But if you pick one of these presets, then it will use these presets. So the presets I decided to use were HDV 1280 by 720, HD 1920 by 1080, 2K, which is 2048 by 1152, QFHD, which is 3840 by 2160, and then 4K, which is 4096 by 2304. Now the one thing I did check is if the project height and the project width match one of these, then it's going to go ahead and select it. So if it's 1280 by 720, it's combo box number 1. Remember, this one is 0, this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So then we check if it's 1920 by 1080, we select number 2, and so forth and so on through the rest of the 5. If it is none of those, then I'm setting the text box height text equal to the p height and converting that to a string. And I'm setting the text width text to the project width converted to a string. And then here I'm calculating the aspect ratio, which I'm using width divided by height. Now these had to be converted to float because aspect ratio is a float. And then I'm setting maintain aspect equal to true, and I'm changing the color of that button to blue. We're going to skip button OK for now and go on down to this little routine. This little routine, we're sending a text string, and the goal is to send the integer value that this text string is. Now, if it contains alphanumeric characters, it's going to be 0. If it contains only numbers, then it's going to convert this to an integer. I created me an integer variable called int converted, and then we're going to do an int.try parse. This says I'm going to try to parse this string into an integer value. So it's going to use the text string, which is what we pass it here, and it's going to output to int converted. And then we're simply going to return int converted, which will return that integer back to the calling program. Now, if they click on the button aspect button, if you remember, that was this button right here. That's to maintain the aspect. First thing it's going to do is it's going to set the maintain aspect equals not maintain aspect. So if it was true, it changes it to false. If it was false, then it changes it to true. If it's true, then what we want to do is make sure we have a text width and height. And if we have both, if both of those lengths are greater than 0, then I'm going to convert the width to integer by passing it that string to this routine we just looked at, and put that into the variable twidth. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the text height.text. We pass it to that routine and put it in theight. And then now I'm going to get my aspect ratio equals the float of width divided by the float of height. Remember, it's always width divided by height. And that works both directions, whether it's wide or tall. And then I change the back color equals to blue. Otherwise, if it is not true, then I'm just going to change the back color back to the system drawing system colors control. And that changes it back to its original color. And so when it's blue, they will match each other. When it is not blue, they will not. Then here we have the swap button, and what happens when we hit this one is I'm going to get me a save width, and I put that from textWidth.text. Then I'm setting the textWidth.text equal to the textHeight.text. And then I'm changing the textHeight.text to the save width. So we have just swapped the two values. And then in the combo box, I am changing that to 0 to read custom, because I don't know if it was one of the settings or not, and I don't go through all the settings to see if it matches a specific one. You would have to, once you've typed in numbers or swapped, you would have to actually select one again to get it to not say custom. So once again, I'm checking to make sure that both text width and height have a length, and then I'm converting the width from the textWidth.text, and I'm converting the height from the textHeight.text, and then I'm calculating the aspect ratio again. And then here we'll see what happens when we change to one of the presets from the combo box. First of all, we want to do a switch, and I'm doing the combo box.selected index, and there are 5 choices that are used. 0 is the custom, so I'm not changing anything if it says custom. If they have chosen the first preset, then we set it to 1280 by 720, and we calculate the aspect ratio of 1280 divided by 720. Notice in both of these cases I'm using the float version of these numbers by putting the F after the number, and that is put into the aspect ratio. So it is calculating the aspect ratio. Now whether or not it's used depends on whether or not that other variable is set to true or false. But we're going ahead and calculating into here just in case it is turned on. And then case number 2, we do the 1920 by 1080. Case number 3 is the 2048 by 1152. And we have case 4 and 5 for the other 2 settings. And then down here, the default, we just do nothing. So it just has the break in it. And then finally, we have these 2 right here, textWidth.keyUp and textHeight.keyUp. I experimented around a little bit and found that keyUp is pretty much the best way to do what I was trying to do here. And as soon as they press a key in one of these text height or text width, the first thing it's going to do is change the combo box selected index to 0 so that it reads custom. Then, if it has a length at this point, for example, what if they just press delete? Then it would have no length. So if they have pressed a key and it has a length, then the integer of width variable we're passing to this routine again, and we're passing it whatever text they have just typed in. Then if it has the maintain aspect checked, and the aspect ratio is not equal to 0. Then I'm calculating the text height.text, and I'm converting to integer 32 the width divided by aspect ratio. And then once that is done, once it is converted to an integer, I am then converting that to a string to put into this text box. Now, the text height.keyup is exactly the same except for our calculation here. Here we are doing width divided by aspect ratio. Here we are doing height times aspect ratio. And that's just how the formula works for the way that I had originally calculated. I had originally calculated aspect equal width divided by height. So if I want the width, then I have to take the aspect times height. If I want the height, then I have to take the width divided by aspect. And then finally, if they push cancel on the cancel button, it will close. Now if we do a quick little test, by default we have 1920 by 1080 since that's what the project was. I can change this to say 2K, and now it says 2048 by 1152. That was maintain is on. So if I typed in say 4096, and notice that the height did change to 2304, which matches what we have here. But notice it does still say custom. And then if I hit the swap button, the two numbers swap. So if I type, let's say 1080 here, then I get 1920 automatically there, and we look at 1920 and 1080 are the two numbers that match. Now if I turn this off, then if I type in a new number here, say 720, then this number did not change. But if I turn this back on and then I change this to 1080, notice now this has changed to 2880, which is, a truly custom size. And then cancel will close the form. So in this case, there's actually a lot of work that goes in that has nothing to do with how the script operates in Vegas itself. All of the work we've done so far is just making the form work. And so in the next tutorial, we'll continue on, and then we'll make the script actually do something in Vegas. So like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next tutorial.